Goeiedei, welcome. My name is Amareske and today I will be doing two smaller book reviews for Beneath the Sugar Sky by Seanan McGuire and In an Absent Dream by Seanan McGuire, book 3 and 4 of the Wayward children's series. After I read book 2, Down Among the Sticks and Bones, I had more or less considered this series a DNF, but then a couple of weeks ago I actually got curious how it went on and if book 3 and 4 would actually be better installments in the series. So I decided to see if I could get the books for a cheaper price than what you would normally pay. And I could get them with a discount, so I decided to give them a chance. I ordered them and I read them. So let's get into Beneath the Sugar Sky. In this book, that is a sequel to Every Heart a Doorway, like almost a direct sequel. We follow a whole bunch of characters we followed in book 1, specifically Kate and Christopher, as well as Nadia. I think she was mentioned once, but I'm not sure anymore because she is supposed to have been quite the quiet and drawn back character. And our main character, or mostly main character, is Cora, a fat girl. And I'm going to say fat, I'm not going to be politically correct because a fact is just a fact. Anyway, we follow her and her voice as she and Nadia see a girl fall from the sky. The girl is called Rini and she's looking for her mother, who was Sumi, who is killed in Every Heart a Doorway. That was part of the murder mystery in that book. And our story starts from there. They need to find Sumi back, so the actual occurrences and things that happened in Confection, which is the world Sumi went to, did take place. So, and because as we see happen in this book, all of a sudden a whole bunch of those things have been turned around and have been turned to what they would have been if Sumi didn't go back to her world after being a political exile. The prose is quite as, you could call it lyrical or flowery as what it was in book 1, but I think in this book it actually fit the world better because most of the book is actually set in the world of Confection, which I actually like, the nonsense world that had still logical rules. I don't know how Seanan McGuire created that world, but I think she did it very, very well. I enjoyed reading the story. I think the plot was well done. But I think one of my main complaints about this book is Cora's voice, because this book sends some pretty, in my opinion, dangerous messages regarding fat acceptance. It sends messages that bullying people because of the way they look isn't right, and I do agree with that. And I also do agree with that people who weigh more obviously can still be active and exercise. But it also does send the message that you cannot judge someone's health by his or her appearance. Well, in fact you can. Especially people in the US who are massively overweight and don't want to listen to the fact that that is incredibly unhealthy. They complain about that you cannot judge people by their weight and judge their health. And our main character apparently is a competitive swimmer and can run faster than like normal weight people. And although this might be possible, the way it was put into the book actually doesn't make sense for like biological reasons, but also just physical reasons. As in, when you weigh more and have a lot of overt fat in your body, you have more resistance from the sky or the water, which makes it more difficult to run and swim fast. Especially in the water, it will completely, more or less, destroy the speed at which you can swim. Of course, like, people can still swim fast because there is techniques for that. But because you weigh more, you have less of a streamlined body, which makes it harder to move easily through the water. So, like, the way it was mostly the way Cora, her voice was written in, and the way she was constantly complaining and whining about being unhappy and overweight or fat. I don't know how big I needed her to imagine her, because that wasn't specifically stated, but the way she was whining about it and about slim people being unhappy because somehow everything is tied to your weight and not to actual experiences in your life and stuff. And even though she states that she should not think that way, but still does, it just felt like it was put in the book to make people believe that her character didn't... I say didn't, but I mean to make us believe that her character knew that she was wrong, but that did not come across, and the character did not actually develop very much throughout the story. I just didn't like Cora's voice, but despite that, I still think this is, so far, I think the best book in the series, or at least the one I enjoyed most, because I really enjoyed the way the story was written, especially the world and the atmosphere. And I liked getting back to characters that we met in book 1. This includes Nancy, who found her way back to her world. We get a short view of what her world looks like, which made me happy. And I think it was done actually in exactly the right way for that world, because it does not seem like a world you can have a lot of action and adventure in. But so, this was my opinion on Beneath the Sugar Sky. Now, on In an Absent Dream, the most recent release, we follow Lundy's story. Lundy is the psychologist at Mrs. West's School for Wayward Children, which book 1 is set in. But this is obviously a prequel with her story as she is a child and ends up in the Goblin Market, a world ruled by logic and fair trade. And we see her go to this world and back to our own multiple times. And she has to choose before she turns 18 if she wants to stay in that world or not. And we see her make some mistakes. And I like this world, but I did not like the writing and the characters in this book as much as in Beneath the Sugar Sky. Although I think that objectively, this might have been the best book in the series so far, but since these books are so tiny, that is actually hard to say. What I think this book lacked most is actually action, because there is multiple actions that happen described in this book, like actually have severe consequences. One involves a character dying, and we are supposed to care about Lundy and Moon's feelings about this death, even though we have no clue who this character was. We have no clue of their personality. They are not developed in the slightest. We have no clue what actually happened during the fight in which the character died. Which I think, why would we care about it? Why would we feel anything for our characters if we have no clue who that character was and how they actually died, how traumatic it actually was for the people who saw it? Because we have no insight at all in how it happened, and then afterwards we get a scene in which Lundy gets turned into a bird, but that entire period of time is skipped until afterwards. But I think it would actually have been interesting to at least in short see her perspective turn into a bird's perspective instead of that of a human. But in general, I thought this book was written well. I found it a nice twist that actually Lundy's father also had been to the goblin market, the same world, and actually knew the rules and understood it. And also that he was very strict because he was scared that one of his children would be whisked away to the world, or multiple of his children. It didn't happen to Lundy's brother, but it did happen to her. But we also see what made Lundy so unhappy and what the influence of her father's job, which is elementary school principal, had on her and her social life. And I found it interesting that Lundy's perspective was written to feel like, at least in part, like she had autism, but also that it wasn't written on the page but just didn't feel like she was a very smart person with autism, because no matter if she has it or not, in a girl, it would not have been diagnosed in the 60s, so it completely fits. And it would not have been diagnosed because those girls would just have been labeled as shy. Even though Lundy is obviously written to have like classical autism spectrum disorder traits for girls. Like being extremely adherent to the rules, like being alone and not really minding it, but also not knowing how to initiate contact with people. This is in part because her father didn't teach her, but also because she has not developed the innate sense that she needs to have proper contact with people. And there were a lot of hints, and the way she thought, the way her perspective was written, it all felt a little bit like she was not your standard neurotypical person. And I think that felt actually great. And I didn't mind at all that it wasn't stated on page, and that it might just be me recognizing some or a lot of the things that I went through in a certain way or another in the main character, because this kind of diversity written in this way actually fits this kind of a story and the time period it is set in. But I would actually want to know if Lundy was supposed to have some kind of autism spectrum disorder. I would want to see something about that in a sequel if I read the sequel, and either see it mentioned, because otherwise this book does not necessarily have a lot of diversity like the other ones, so in that way it would stand out. Not that it is a bad thing, it's just it would stand out, because this series actually drives on diversity quite a lot. And having a book with only neurotypical persons without actual disabilities would be a little bit odd. And except for that, a lot of the characters in the goblin market turn into other kind of creatures or other kind of creatures, but since they did not actually play a massive role in the book, and it didn't go further than something like a centaur or unicorn type thing, I don't really call that diversity, especially if you compare it to the way diversity was written into the previous books. But we'll have to wait and see. These were my reviews, and this was it for now. Thank you for watching, and tot de keer!